Our final presentation before lunch is a particularly nice one. When we lament the quality of our youth, this, I think, will restore your faith. The elementary school in Columbus, Nebraska, St. Isidor's, every year participates in the U.S. History Day program. And this year, a group of sixth graders put together a history of the Strategic Air Command and the Cold War. And they've done it in 10 minutes, and General Lawson took 40 minutes to sum up the history of SAC. These young people did it in 10 minutes, and I doubt that any of us could have done as credible a job. They have their own introduction. They are Jessica Daly, Michael Ballack, Michael Goki, Joey Beauvais, and Matt Raimondo. And they're going to give their own introduction, and then we're going to show the video. It runs about 10 minutes, and it is quite outstanding. We offered them some help. They got more help than they really needed. We presented this at the Officers Club to about 40 or 50 people, and they got overwhelmed with help. Rob and I have been helping them from the very beginning. They couldn't have done this without their teachers and their parents who are in the back. We invited them to come along to see this presentation. And with that, introduce Jessica, and they will give you the introduction, and then we will roll the tape. Jessica?
We, the students of St. Isidore School, our parents, and our teachers, are honored to be here today. We would especially like to thank Rob Hoover, John Bergen, and all the retired and active SAC personnel who helped us with this History Day project.
History Day is a national competition with a specific theme for each year. This year's theme was Turning Points in History. We started back in September doing research, writing our script, scanning pictures, and downloading videos and music, and doing interviews. Each of us had about 400 hours in this project. We compete in the junior division and went from districts to state to national competition in Washington, D.C. Although we didn't place in the top 10, we've had many memorable experiences, visiting various historical sites in and around the Capitol.
In making our video, we learned about SAC and its role in the Cold War. We learned about the men and women who for almost 50 years maintained a vigilance for peace throughout the free world. And we are proud to have come to know a few of these personally. We thank each and every one of you for your role in our freedom today.
I'm convinced there's nothing the Soviets admire so much as strength, and nothing for which they have less respect than for military weakness. With these prophetic words, Winston Churchill forewarned the world of the evil of communism. Following World War II and the fall of the Third Reich, the threat of communist domination became more of a reality. Under the diabolical dictator of Russia, Joseph Stalin, communism spread throughout Europe. Stalin's form of communism soon drew the attention of the free world. His massacre of millions of Russian landowners, the slaughter of 35,000 Red Army officers, and his brutal willingness to destroy anyone whom he thought opposed him caught the world off guard. His butchery of the people in the countries which the Soviets occupied became a chilling wake-up call to democracy. To a world looking for peace, the alarm almost came too late. From the beginning of communism, conflict with democracy was inevitable. Soviet military documents taught that communism and democracy could not coexist for long. One or the other must triumph. A series of frightful collisions between the Soviets and the capitalistic states was certain. And only an undefeated United States stood in the way of Soviet world control. Even in the early 30s, Soviet spies began to assess U.S. military strengths. The U.S., having demobilized most of its fighting force after World War II and limited personnel and resources to counter the communist threat, the first commander of SAC, General George Kenney, was to assess the Soviet threat and develop a strategic deterrent capability. The U.S. military leaders realized that they would not always have a monopoly on atomic weapons. Believing that the heavy bomber would be the delivery system for at least the next 10 years, and that the next war would come by surprise attack, the Spots Board in 1945 determined that the Air Force would have to be ready to fight at the beginning of hostilities, and that strategic deterrence would be our best line of defense. Having learned a valuable lesson from the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, and with the many uncertainties concerning the Soviet military, a new freedom force was soon to be born. It would become a force so powerful, it would be a turning point in the history of the world. The battle between communism and democracy began shortly after World War II. It was to prepare to fight in this Cold War, as it was later called, that on March 21st, 1946, the Strategic Air Command was established by Commanding General of the Army Air Force, Carl A. Spaatz. It moved to Offutt Air Force Base near Omaha, Nebraska in 1948. The fear of nuclear war and its effects hung heavy over the world. SAC's mission was to be prepared to conduct offensive missions and maximum long-range reconnaissance in cooperation with other land and naval forces. It was to use the latest and most advanced weapons and to train the personnel for the continuance of SAC throughout the world. Though SAC's mission was offensive, its motto would become, "Peace is our profession." 1948 saw the rapid growth of SAC with the delivery of the new B-50 and B-36 bombers. With fundamentals in place, Lieutenant General Curtis E. LeMay assumed the position as commander of SAC. Still battling those who saw no need for a powerful peacetime force, LeMay would turn SAC into a global deterrent that would keep the peace throughout the duration of the Cold War.
LeMay's primary mission was to change the way SAC people thought. He did not want them to think, what if we go to war, but rather, we are at war now. LeMay devised the first master war plan in which every member was to practice as if the real thing were happening. LeMay's goal was to make every crew member strive for perfection. SAC's crews would be training 24 hours a day, every day. However, early shakedown exercises were so unsatisfactory that it caused a massive overhaul in SAC's entire program. Realizing that America would no longer have the luxury of time and distance at the beginning of the next war, and that the only defense against air attack would be offensive measures, he devised his war plan accordingly. He proposed that SAC's capabilities be increased to the point of being able to deliver the entire stockpile of 133 nuclear weapons in a single massive attack upon 70 key Soviet cities. After extensive evaluation, SAC planners concluded that 1/3 of the command's aircraft could be kept on alert at all times. This plan was accepted in 1949. The introduction of jet-propelled aircraft in the early 50s significantly changed the role of air war strategy, and with the use of in-flight refueling, the range of the bombers became greater, allowing a greater advantage to the striking force. At the same time, however, the uncertainty of Soviet military strengths grew. Did they have the defense systems, radar network, fighter squadrons, and anti-aircraft artillery that they boasted? And how many high-altitude surface-to-air missile batteries did they have? Air reconnaissance and surveillance became a priority for SAC. High-altitude recon planes carrying sophisticated electronic hardware and long-range cameras made many forays along the borders and into bloc countries. It was during this time that Lieutenant Gary Powers, a former SAC pilot flying a CIA U-2 reconnaissance plane, was shot down by a surface-to-air missile over Russia, causing an international incident. Later, intelligence-gathering satellites would provide additional military information. It was also during this period that intercontinental ballistic missiles were being tested. Proponents of ICBMs believed that the unmanned missiles were the future of America's offensive system. But LeMay argued that though they could supplement the manned bombers, they could never replace them. Missiles once launched could never be recalled like bombers.
On July 1st, 1957, General LeMay ended his 9-year command. He was replaced by General Thomas S. Power, who felt that SAC was of the utmost importance to the security and welfare of the free world. As long as the Soviets knew of the massive striking capabilities of SAC, they would think twice before undertaking a major attack. He let the world know that SAC had aircraft at the end of runways, bombs loaded, and crews ready to take off in 15 minutes, stationed around the world. In 1962, during a missile attack on its military installations, a new tactic was added. Dubbed Looking Glass and flying in shifts, It kept a command plane in the air 24 hours a day with a battle plan, general and full staff on board. Looking Glass continued in effect for 30 years, operating out of its main base at Offutt. On October 14, 1962, in what was to become known as the Cuban Missile Crisis, a SAC U-2 reconnaissance plane flying over western Cuba photographed nuclear missile sites being constructed. It was the biggest find in military history. 10 days later, flying another recon mission, Major Rudolph Anderson was shot down over Cuba by a surface-to-air missile and killed. A U.S. naval blockade prevented the Soviet Union from unloading more nuclear missiles. However, it was SAC's capability of delivering 6,000 megatons of total explosive force that gave President Kennedy the power to force Nikita Khrushchev to withdraw the missiles that were in Cuba. The story of the Strategic Air Command is the story of the Cold War. It was SAC's unequaled power which became the turning point of Soviet aggression and changed world history forever. The freedom we take for granted is a result of those whose lives were a vigilance for peace. And so, the war won with the collapse of communism in the early 90s. The Strategic Air Command was stood down, its mission accomplished. General Bruce K. Holloway, Commander-in-Chief of SAC from 1968 to 1972, commented on the impact of SAC on world events. His profound words were reiterated by Rob Hoover, an historian for the SAC Museum and an officer who served under Holloway.
I have heard SAC variously described as the greatest military force since the hordes of Genghis Khan or Alexander or Napoleon. But in fact, it was none of the above. It was in a class by itself, the best equipped, best manned, best trained, and best disciplined, most respected, and most feared war machine in history. More than any other single institution, it prevented nuclear holocaust.
On June 2, 1992, General Colin Powell, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, at the standing down ceremonies of SAC at Offutt Air Force Base near Omaha, Nebraska, paid tribute to the men and women who built and maintained this remarkable force with these words.
You never let us down. You were always prepared. You did your job well. And the horror of World War III never came. You kept the peace. And the nation and the free world will be forever grateful.
Produced by Jessica Daly, Joey Beauvais, Michael Goki, Matthew Ramondo, and Michael Ballin.